There's something to it being a coach, being a father and everything. Like, well, I told you not to touch the oven, but I mean, if you want to, go for it. You're gonna need to learn one way or the other, and everyone learns differently. So, like, if you have to go ahead and suffer through this and either, fail, the weight cut itself, or fail the next day, that's something that you need to do. And there are people who need to kind of do that.
Welcome to Barbell Shrugged. I'm Mike Bledsoe with Doug Larson and Kenny Kane, and we're hanging out with the Jesse Burdick.
Thanks for having me.
Probably one of the strongest guys that ever walked the planet, I would have to say.
Ever.
Is that right?
At least the strongest guy in this backyard.
Yeah. Definitely one of the most handsome strongmen there are.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
I got that going for me.
Yeah.
Not a lot else, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say that. Mike, I would add to the introduction that he's recently started a hairstyling line.
That's true.
It's true.
It's a hair consultant line, really.
I can't believe that.
Just basically helping people with their hair. So, it's like you call me, send me pictures like, hey, man, I'm thinking I'm going to get a cut here. I'm like, well, with my vast knowledge here, let me help you out. It's like that. I would have never advised you to do that.
What would you do?
Well, I would probably have you grow it out for a while, right? And then we're going to do a pompadour look for you. Dye it really dark black.
Okay.
Because, you're going to go to Sweden, too. We want you to kind of really, really stick out over there. Be really, really different.
The black pompadour.
Absolutely.
It's not different enough as it is.
No, like Sharpie black. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And just go the greaser style look for a while.
I'm in.
I really think that you could pull that off.
Hair by Jesse Burdick.
There you go.
In addition to
.com.
lifting 5 billion pounds.
Yeah. So you've been a powerlifter. You're getting back in the sport.
Yeah.
And years ago, we were at the Arnold, and then you played baseball.
Yes.
Yeah. And you also got into the whole mobility thing before every other powerlifter.
Yes.
Is that right?
That is. I was lucky enough to meet Kelly Starrett very, very early on when I started to do the powerlifting seminars for CrossFit. And he was just kind of down the way, and he was like, hey, man, why don't you come down and, help me teach a couple classes. So I was at San Francisco CrossFit in the parking lot of Dreams, coaching twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. I went there and I did like a squat and deadlift for him, and through that ended up on a lot of the mobilitywod.com stuff and just started kind of moving into that. I've before I started powerlifting and doing these things like that, I was actually high level. I had my CSCS, then I went and got my massage therapy license, and I'm an ART therapist as well. I got 3 or 4 of those certifications, so I knew a lot of stuff that Kelly was talking about.
You're just not a big, strong, handsome man.
No, there's
so much more to it.
There's some other layers to it as well. So when Kelly was starting to talk about stuff, and I could follow what he was saying, and I was able to move very well and articulate what he was saying, and actually understand it, and also understand it through movement myself. So he became a fan of mine, started using me a lot of stuff in a lot of stuff. Started to work with each other. Helped him develop some of the products. I actually came up with the name Voodoo Band for him. When he first kind of saw that, and we started experimenting with it, we was like, well, what does this actually do? How can we really explain this to people? I was like, it does so much, man. Just fucking call it voodoo, and you won't have to answer a lot of questions. So I was able
magic.
to. It is. It is
magic.
It's black magic. So I was able to start hanging out with Kelly and starting to do a lot of stuff with him. So while he was doing those seminars a bunch, I was doing the seminars with Mark for Lou for a while, and that's how we started with that. And it kind of it got a lot of traction because everyone's fucked up and hurts.
Yeah, that's true.
And if you can
almost nobody's like got it all worked out.
No. So if you can help someone move a little bit better, both by showing them how to and then actually forcing them into a good position, people end up loving you.
So the whole fit fit it or force it thing.
Yeah, it's very, very true. You get both. This is going to be the theme for the whole show.
The Kenny Kane way?
The Kenny Kane way.
So were you always a pretty good mover and relatively mobile for a powerlifter even before you met Kelly?
Yes. Yeah, I was. I thought I was. I always prided myself on being able to, be technically very proficient. So as I was kind of coming up into the strength world, I had a couple of coaches who were very, very technically sound, and that's what they preached a lot of. And kind of coming from the conjugate style of training, the Westside Barbell method, if you will, the technique was something that that I was very, very interested in understanding, because a lot of times you see people move, you're like, God, that was 900 pounds, and it didn't even look like this guy broke a sweat.
Right.
How do you do this? It's, there's a lot of grunt work behind it, but I mean, if you understand how to move properly, these things start to kind of, that kind of weird line starts to blur, where it's, you're technically so very proficient, but you can move really, really heavy weight, and you can really do some really, really fun stuff. So, I mean, from there, that was just drilled into me. And you take a step further back, playing baseball, it was always just drill, 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 drill. And then from my dad, I always learned, it's always like, well, you may not understand something. If you want to, you can find out how. You just got to read about it and then work really hard to figure it out. So I think that's all that really technique is when we kind of come down to things. It's just figuring out how to get in that position and then putting yourself in that position over and over and over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I remember from, actually Mike mentioned this briefly a second ago, is that we were at the Arnold together 3 or 4 or 5 or however many years ago.
Yeah.
And we were on John North's podcast at the time, briefly. And one of the things I remember you said on that show before like bodybuilding and assistance work was like cool in CrossFit, like it took a while for that to really make its way in, because like bodybuilders were the bad guys there for a long time.
Right.
And one of the things that you said, and I was like, finally somebody just openly said this, was that you go in when you're training and you do a couple of heavy movements, maybe 1 or 2, and then the rest of it's just assistance work. It's very bodybuilding focused. And I was like, nobody is fucking saying that right now. And it was good to hear it from someone who has a lot of training experience, because it wasn't cool in the CrossFit space yet. And it kind of has been okay to do those things in the last 1 or 2 years, but I feel like you were ahead of the game with respect to assistance work for the CrossFit market.
Yeah, I think that's something that we've tried to preach for a long time, because I think there's too many people who, they want to go in there and, they just want to do their main lifts and then get out. And, it's you got to kind of compare it to, like math homework. You got to show your work. You could get the answer, right? But if everyone's like, okay, but you got that, but how did you get it? We're like, well, I just did it.
This explains a lot about my life. I was like, that's how math shit was turned in by me.
Yeah, just an answer.
I just knew the number.
I just knew it. It's just happened. But and then you got to show your work. And then it was also I grew up or kind of came up in powerlifting, where it was more about like, it doesn't matter what you look like, you just got to be big. I'm like, well, okay. It's like, no, it's all leverages. It doesn't matter if it's fat or muscle, just be fucking huge. Like, okay, I guess that's right. So that's why, Mark Bell was, 330 pounds. I was 330 pounds. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter. Just get big. That's what's going to get you stronger. And after a while, you start to see some of these guys who are a little smaller than you lifting the same amount of weight, and they look jacked, and you're just like, man, it's like, what am I doing wrong here? Like,
they're fucking sexy and strong.
Exactly. It's like, do I need to eat more McDonald's? That's what I have to do? It's like, probably less
That's usually
McDonald's.
the answer.
It
More
is.
of whatever got you where you're at now
exactly.
is how you make progress.
Whatever got you to 330, just add more to it. But it ended up becoming, we're like, okay, it's okay to look like you work out. You don't have to look like a giant fat. It's true, and I mean, eventually.
Don't be ashamed of your abs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then it kind of came down to kind of the whole idea of just, where you got to work on your weaknesses eventually. And kind of in the CrossFit realm of thing, everyone was just going in there, hitting their WOD, doing, some strength stuff. And then they're just neglecting just a whole huge side of things. And it's not the fact that, they actually look like they work out, but it's like, okay, but just fix some of the stuff, whether that's mobility stuff, whether that's just doing some, some hamstring work or some glute stuff or some lower back stuff. So I'm glad that, I really appreciate you saying that was on the forefront of that. I think that's something that we preached and tried to get in there and tried to ingrain to people. And now it has, it just helps people last longer, be injury free, and it also look pretty good as well.
What are some common weaknesses you're finding with CrossFitters? I mean, you train in a gym where there's powerlifting, there's MMA, there's CrossFit, there's a lot going on. The movements are not as varied as people would make them out to be.
Right.
So, which is going to lead to a lot of common deficiencies. What are you seeing?
I mean, classically, ever since I've started to work in kind of the CrossFit realm of things, something that's always been a big weakness for everyone has been hamstring stuff. Put them on a GHR, no one can do a strict GHR.
Right.
So you just
glute ham raise.
Glute ham raise. Sorry, yes. So anything.
It's the sit-up machine.
It's the right. Just like the reverse hyper is the coffee and that's the stand-up desk.
Stand-up desk.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's always been that way. Even in the power, even at Louis, even at Westside, that's where everybody put their keys and their and everything and their Mountain Dews and everything. That was always there. But lower back work, hamstring stuff, and then that was to kind of start everything, and then just general upper body strength for females, and then upper back work specifically for guys. And then as the trend
When you say upper back,
upper back, traps, rear delts, anything up there behind your shoulder blades, shoulder blade movement just in general. I always call it kind of CrossFit shoulder syndrome. Everyone's just really internally rotated this way and end up it's very hard to kind of get them back out into this position. And it's not necessarily due to the fact that they're just so bound up here. It's the fact that they're very weak here that they can't actually stand up and articulate a good tall kind of position.
What are some exercises for that upper back?
Just face pulls. I mean, it's a really complicated one. Follow me. You grab something and then you pull it towards your fence, to your face.
I get it.
Face. Pull.
You're blowing Kenny's mind right now.
When you, Jesse, so much so, man, I feel like Mike.
Whoa, dude.
It's in so many colors when you speak. It's amazing. It's like you have a unicorn head.
It is. It's right there. His hand is so wet right now. It's so gross. He doesn't want to, there you go. You're going to test positive for something later. I can't tell you what, but it'll be fun.
Give him a lick and just go sit in the corner.
Totally.
His hand's red and bumpy already.
Gain 40 pounds after the show.
Just in your hand.
This has been going back a while. It's funny that they talk about the Arnold. Like you first, when we met, I think it was about 2011. You and Mark had been going around. You just started kind of talking to CrossFit gyms, and you came to our gym. And when you guys came, it transferred everybody's thinking very quickly because so many weaknesses were exposed. Everything from what you just mentioned, upper back, hamstrings, but then a big thing for our particular community was just the articulation of external rotation. The level of accuracy that you guys could come in and make us aware, oh fuck, we don't have control of our femurs.
Right.
By the way, that's substantial when moving the rest of your body.
Right.
So I think after you guys left, that really evolved a lot of our conversations. Secondly, can I lick your head?
If you want to.
Okay.
Are you?
And we might say, I really do want to gain 40 pounds.
There you go.
So, and test positive for everything. So,
Kenny's not very risk averse.
So
you'll have to put something underneath this, as
at Barbell Shrugged, we do drug tests. And,
oh, really?
And if you pass, you're fired.
Well, consider me hired. I'm gonna, you know what? I'll actually, let's do this. When you drug test me, if you get all of them, I'll hire you guys.
Awesome.
There you go.
Awesome. Let's go.
When did you and Mark meet up?
We met.
And we might have bypassed some stuff. I know, a lot of the listeners are going to know what you've done and what your sort of numbers are. But can we just take 2 steps back, just so some of the people who.
After we're 15 minutes into the show.
Sure. Well, I know, but I realize that we didn't say.
Well, at least you're doing it.
Yeah.
Because I didn't.
Yeah. I mean, so what are your records as far as your PRs?
So in geared powerlifting, my best squat is 911. My best bench is 633. My best deadlift is 826. In raw powerlifting, my best squat is 733. My best bench is 521, I think. Pounds and kilos get confused in my head sometimes. And my best pull is 766.
Woo.
And that's done, and I'm one of the few people in powerlifting history that's totaled elite in 5 different weight classes. So I've totaled elite at 220, 242, 275, 308, and super heavyweight. And I'm the only idiot that I know of that's totaled both 220 and super heavyweight elite weight totals in the same year.
Jesus.
Holy shit.
That's a drastic. What do you feel?
Which one did you hit first, by the
Yeah.
way?
So I went.
Did you hit high and then cut down?
No, I went low and then went back up.
Dang,
Wow.
really?
So I was sitting. I was sitting about like 260 or so, and then I dieted down to about 245, cut down to the 220s, and then after that I gave myself about 6 months and ate up to about 290. And then I did some really awful eating. Like, to be honest with you, the weight loss stuff, the weight cut, wasn't as bad as trying to put on like 20 pounds of just bloat and awfulness.
We tell people that all the time. People are like, "Oh, it's so easy to gain weight." I'm like, "No,
It's the worst.
Not once you plateau.
It was terrible. It was terrible. I took at one time I was eating 2 things of ramen, right? But with 10 of the packets of the flavoring packets.
oh shit."
So I was doing that
Mostly on MSG.
2 to 3 times a day. That'll put 10 pounds of bloat on you.
That's how things
immediately.
are preserved.
It's awful.
And science fairs.
Awful. Exactly. I was eating a bag of Doritos a day as well.
Oh,
I know, it hurt. It was bad.
brutal.
It was bad. I had heartburn for like consistently for about 6 months.
Yeah. Where do you lift most naturally out? Like, where do you feel best?
I feel the best, and I think I was the strongest when I was in the like 275 class, and I would weigh anywhere between like 263 and like 275, kind of depending on, where we were in the year. So that's usually where I feel the best at, and I'm sitting about 270 right now.
Have you seen a movement in powerlifting since you guys are sort of at the forefront of like the technical aspect of it, from like it being more of a brutish thing to that technique and that skill being just as much emphasized just as much?
I think it's always been, from the start. I think it was just all kind of just brute lifted, however you end up how you can, and then kind of science came along, and everyone started to kind of figure out that the Russians have been doing this research for years and years and years, and figured out, oh hey, there's a better way to do some of this stuff. So you add in some programming, you add in some technique, and then it kind of progresses from there. So there's always been a nice kind of mix of things. I think what was ushered in a lot in our era was kind of it's okay to look like you lift weights, and you don't have to be a giant fat ass, and you can lift a lot of weight too. But also the really drastic weight cuts started to come along, where people are cutting anywhere between 20 and 30 pounds, usually with the 24-hour weigh-in. So someone who's at 220, like when I cut to 220, I weighed in the next day at 246. So I cut.
So where'd you start?
I started at like 240-ish.
So you're around 240. You cut down to 220. You weighed in, and then within 24 hours before you lifted, you were back around 246.
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally healthy.
Yeah, so this is a really good thing to note is we've addressed this on the show before, but I like recovering this ground because I think there's a lot of people who just don't grasp this, but it's easy to cut the weight down. It's putting it back on and being able to perform the next day that's really the challenge. Most people fuck that up.
Yes, they do. And I mean, everyone thinks that's going to be the easiest part about it. And they screw it up usually right off the jump. So you step on the scale, you're 219, then you step back off the scale. I'm like, I'm going to go eat a bunch of pancakes. You eat 2 pancakes, you blow up, and you're like, I feel so sick.
Yeah.
And then you can't eat for 4 hours, and then you're just like, oh, what the hell am I going to do? So, I mean, there's like... It's come a long, long way as far as, how to kind of properly move these things. When I'm working with an athlete who's cutting anything more than 5% of their body weight, there's a really step-by-step process that we use in order to kind of get that weight back on and get it on properly. And we don't actually have them eat like actual food probably till about 3 hours after the weigh-in. So they're trying to, get in Pedialyte, get in, protein shakes, just get your body to like remember, like,
hey, IV up at all?
Whenever we can, yeah, absolutely. I think that's the easiest way to put the weight back on. But still, it's a challenge and it's a skill to know how to use that, because I mean, what you need to do is we figured out after a lot of trial and error is that after you eat or after you get an IV, you got to start moving around. Otherwise, it just sits. So you want that to go back out into your musculars and get it out into the extremities there to kind of start moving around. Then it goes on as it sort of kind of came off, because I mean it just comes. You can't like, oh, we'll take off 10 pounds here and 10 pounds here. It's it just all kind of comes off. And where you put it back on, as long as you're kind of moving and you do these little mini workouts after you eat, after you hit an IV or whatever it ends up being, you can start to put the stuff back on almost where you put it off. Feel good enough, but it's still, powerlifting, you can go 9 for 9. That's a perfect day. Weightlifting, 6 for 6. But you got to hit your, hit your weight cut, and you got to get on the scale properly, and then you got to put it back on. That's 2 more events when you're doing something, drastic, one way or the other. With weightlifting, and there's usually a 2-hour weigh-in.
Yep.
So that's going to be, I don't really hear of anyone cutting more than 4 or 5 pounds.
I cut. I always cut about 5 pounds.
Right.
And anything more than that, it was going to eat into performance.
Right.
And then, I even did what you were talking about. I had 2 hours. I would have to cut down the last minute every time.
Yep.
And I decided to go up a weight class after a while.
Yeah.
But I would be drinking enough water, sugar, and some other things to get the weight back on. And I was basically sick.
Yep.
Because it's only 2 hours, I would be warming up and I'd be sick. Like I'd be in between, and then about halfway through warm-ups, I'd start feeling good. By the time I was on the platform, I was amazing.
Yeah.
But there was trial and error to get there. People were like, "Are you going to be okay?" I was like, "I'll be fine. I'll be fine."
But that's there's a huge mental aspect to that too, because if you take the barbell and you grab it and you feel like it just cuts through you, you're like, fuck, it's gonna really suck today.
Totally.
And then you're like, no, just give me an hour, I'll be okay, I'll figure it out. They're like, no.
Good luck with that.
Good luck.
Exactly. But that's a lot to, you got to be not only physically strong but mentally strong, A, to go through the cut like that, and B, just to be like, I can do this, I know I'll be fine. It's just, I got to, take some of this nutrition in and feel better later on as I go.
As you were coming up, did you ever lay goose eggs and mistime this whole thing? Like you put 25 pounds back on, it doesn't get back into the extremities, as you say.
Yep.
And then you're underperforming, like you're 40 pounds lighter.
Absolutely.
To begin with.
100%. You take the bar out to squat and it feels like there's just nothing underneath you anymore. No body, you have nothing in the middle. You can't feel your belt. You can't feel the bottom of a squat. And you're just like, well, shit. So when I cut down to 220, I had to do it 3 times before I was successful to hit an elite total.
Okay.
So I missed.
So and you learned your lessons, and each time you tweak something a little bit.
Yep. And then as it's this isn't something that's set in stone, for the reason of each time you're going to do it, something's going to be different, body weight, circumstances, etc. And then what we were talking about earlier, Mike, is everybody's different.
Right.
So I can give you like the schedule, but I can't be like, look, this is what usually happens. Right. You're going to spin one way or the other. You just got to let me know how you're feeling, and we can kind of dial it back in as you go. Right. But I can't tell you, just follow this list and you'll be fine, because there's going to be people who respond to carbohydrates differently, movement differently, water. They're not going to be able to uptake blah, 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 blah. So, there's so many things that can kind of change that. So it's kind of a living document, if you will. So, but we have a lot of it pretty dialed in. But there's going to be swings one way or the other, and you see that at the lowest level. People just starting to cut just a couple pounds for a meet, to people who are in the professional cutting 20, 30 pounds for it as well. It's continually changing.
So, given that there's a lot of variety there, do you have athletes practice this outside of competition, where they're not trying this out when it actually matters?
Yeah, I try to make sure that athletes aren't cutting for a meet. Their first 2 or 3. I just want them to get on the platform, feel good, be successful. Yeah. And then once they have some numbers underneath them, and they have a little bit of experience, if they're somewhere between a weight class and they want to go down and set of numbers, and we have a record board at our gym, just like some of the other powerlifting gyms do. And they're like, that I want that square, that's mine. I'm like, all right, man, let's do it. If it's over 5% of their body weight, like I have a guy who wants to cut down to 198s. He's been in the 220s, for a while now. So he sits anywhere between 217 and 223, depending on the day and how many times he visits 7-Eleven. So that's where that 10%. It's really an interesting thing, as much as we want to say everyone's so different. There's that 10% right there of the body weight where it really gets squirrely and weird. So he wants to do this, and he wants to do it at the meet that we do every year, the Reebok Record Breakers in November. It's like, all right, that's a really big meet. I don't want you to fuck this up. So he's going to practice here in about 2 weeks, where there's a couple other people cutting, and just see where we can kind of get him and see where we get to, and then we'll kind of be able to figure it out. So absolutely. And if it's anything towards that 10%, I always practice it. Anything a little bit less, it's not going to be. We can pretty much gauge how it's going to go. I can tell them how it's going to feel. And then it's whether they learn their lesson, they stop cutting and go up a weight class and just say, fuck it. Or they're like, oh, that was fun. I'm like, you're pretty sick. So you're in the right
attracts
sport.
the masochist very well.
Yeah, 10% was always what I shot for when I was fighting MMA, and I had 24 to 30 hours after weigh-ins. Like I try to die down to right around 187 because I was fighting at 170, so 17 pounds above that. And the few times that I went over that, it was either really rough or there was one fight where I actually missed weight. I was much bigger than I should have been, but I thought I could make it anyway. And I was 198 24 hours before, super hyperhydrated.
Yeah.
So that wasn't my true weight because I was hyperhydrated and I had extra fluid in me. But I only made it down to 172, and then the next day I was 191, 192.
Yeah.
And that was a little bit much. That was a rough ass cut. So 10% I think is a good number.
It rings true almost across the board whenever we're dealing with there's some athletes. There are people who can if they're like MMA or they're kind of wrestlers, you guys are sick motherfuckers. and you've been cutting weight since you've been 8 years old. You're like, I'm just going to throw in some trash bags and run around the block, Dad. Like, all right, son, go for it. So those kind of people are you can handle more. You know what I mean? You could handle a little bit more of a weight cut.
Well, there's also more variables in that too. I mean,
very true.
With the barbell, it's just very straightforward.
Right.
John Hackelman used to talk a lot about that, cutting weight and with all the UFC guys and just getting all those fighters ready for it.
And I mean, what we found, a lot of the fighters will end up in kind of a sauna usually, and we try and keep people out of a sauna as much as possible. That just drains their performance. They could just never kind of get that weight back. I don't know where it pulls from. I mean, it's usually that last little bit, those last 3-4 pounds that are always the hardest, and you got to lock somebody in the sauna and kind of just watch your friend let me out.
We've all been there.
You'll be okay.
Yeah.
No, I'm dying.
I always like going to the gym in town for a local competition, and I'm in there with a hoodie, and then other people in there in their swimsuits what the fuck is wrong with this guy?
Yes.
And he's been in here way too long. Way too long.
He doesn't understand the sauna. You're supposed to take all that shit off. Check out the old naked guys next to you.
What about ladies? So I find that women have a much more difficult time
about the
cutting
ladies?
weight.
Oh yeah, the ladies.
I agree.
Did it come out like that?
It was just a fun transition.
It always comes out like that.
Yeah. So anyway, let's talk about chicks.
I'm a natural creeper.
Let's talk about chicks. I agree. I mean, it is a little bit more difficult, and in my experience, I haven't had anyone go kind of that magic 10%. It's usually I try and dial it back to kind of a 5 to 7-ish is really where I like to just hey, look, just. You shouldn't have eaten that much in your training cycle. It's going to be too much for you. But I mean, there's something to it being a coach, being a father and everything.
Yeah.
Well, I told you not to touch the oven, but I mean, if you want to, go for it. You're going to need to learn one way or the other, and everyone learns differently. So if you have to go ahead and suffer through this and either, fail, the weight cut itself or fail the next day, that's something that you need to do, and there are people who need to kind of do that, and there are girls who have no, I'll be fine. I'm all right, man, let's go ahead. Yeah. But they're dealing with some different hormones, and they got some monthly visitors that really kind of fuck that whole thing up too. So I mean, you're dealing with 3 or 4 more things than you normally would with guys, and I agree. It screws things up a little bit more. Now there are people who have dialed it in, but they've done it probably 10 times, and they understand what works for them.
Definitely.
But just off the jump, you got to really kind of dial it back for women.
Speaking of women, since Super Training started, have you seen a significant change in the last 10, 11 years with the sort of influx of women powerlifting just in general?
It's been astronaut. The growth in the female kind of barbell sports, I think you can safely say, has been astronomical. I mean, it's gone from the point where in strongman powerlifting, Olympic lifting, you could easily confuse a chick and a dude sometimes, from kind of back in the day. And now you're looking at some chicks who are model runway gorgeous, who are stepping on the platform and putting up ridiculous amounts of weight. And whether you like it or not, I think, CrossFit's had a huge impact on this because CrossFit is kind of the gateway drug to some of the other barbell sports, right? And they're like, oh, hey, I'm kind of strong, I want to lift heavier, so I'm going to go over here and do powerlifting or Olympic lifting. And it's just shined a light on it. And some of the records that are being broken now by women, it's just ridiculous.
It's incredible.
It's so cool to kind of see, and I mean, I'm certainly biased because I've got I've got 9-year-old twin daughters,
right? And
to kind of have them see this and have it, like strong women be featured, and it's okay to do this stuff. But I mean, look, she's still hot, and this is still kind of cool. Still good looking. She's still powerful, and yay women and all that other stuff. But I mean, they're lifting amazing amounts of weight, and this is what they do. So it's been that growth. I don't even know if they can measure it. I mean, from the growth of USAWs, 2-3 times. I mean, I remember the days when the Arnold would be basically held in the closet, for USAW Nationals. They used to have it there, and it was quiet, and I would wander into the room, and and I would see, and then I saw like Kendrick's like, oh, Kendrick, and everyone kind of look at me. I was like, sorry, I clapped.
I clapped like loud.
I disrupted the camera guy. He was like, whoa, oh my God, and he missed his shot. I mean, now you can't, now it's a week long. I'm taking my daughters.
Amazing.
And it goes to like midnight.
It does. I'm taking my girls. They qualified. I'm taking them to USAW. I think it's Youth Nationals in Atlanta in about a month and a half here. It's 6 days long.
Right.
I mean, for kids who are like, I mean, my girls are 9. It's 9 to 13, I believe, correct? And there's going to be.
I don't know. I mean, it's 9. I coached like one youth. Athlete ever.
But it's been it's going to be 5 or 6 days long, and I mean, I don't even know if they used to have a youth nationals. They used to have to put them all together, and I mean, in powerlifting, kind of the same thing. So the growth in that has been like more chicks do it, more dudes want to come and do it too, and then a lot more spectators are going to kind of come
just
as well.
Like the club. Make it free for the ladies.
Yeah, absolutely.
What up?
We were just about to interview somebody who was at the meet we saw you at a month ago.
Right.
What was the lifter's name? Who we will have on the show at some point?
Oh, the woman we're meeting?
Yeah.
Stephanie Cohn.
Yeah,
Stephanie Cohn. I mean, great example. I mean, of everything you just talked about.
We're meeting with her tomorrow, by the way.
Oh, okay. So she was.
Is she coming down?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, she's awesome.
Or Monday.
Her and Hayden are great. They're really good friends of mine. Great people. And she's. She looks great. She's an amazing Olympic lifter and an amazing power lifter as well. And she's, I think she's a doctor. She's going to be a doctor. Physical
PT. Super smart.
So I mean, she's going to University of Miami, and she's I don't know where she is in that whole thing, but I mean, she's got it going on all levels,
all fronts,
all levels.
Yeah, it's funny because she came and joined us with her Pedialyte because we were waiting to shoot the episode, and she was cutting to make weight, and then Mike, or then she
had
shows
a really
up
hard cut that day too.
Yeah,
it was not pretty. It took her. She was the last person to weigh in at the afternoon weigh-ins, I think, and she only really had.
She needed every minute to get there.
She did. She only had like 12 hours to kind of reconstitute as well. So that really, I think that ended up really kind of hurting her. And I don't know the details of it. I wasn't privy to what was going on, but I think she did kind of that magic. I'm a couple pounds over, I'll still be able to handle it. And in the past she had, I don't know what the difference was this time, but I mean, that was a really, really rough cut for her.
You put travel on top of that.
Of course.
You hop in a plane and it gets weird.
Let's
take a break real quick. When we come back, I want to talk about creating a training environment.
Awesome.
Hey everybody, Marcus Gurzy, co-host of the Barbell Business Podcast. If you're a gym owner who's looking to fix, build, or just take your gym from good to great, tune in every Tuesday to the Barbell Business Podcast. You can find us on iTunes and anywhere else you can download a podcast, or you can watch the video version on YouTube on the Barbell Shrugged channel. Tune in to find Doug, myself, and Mike Bledsoe talking about the latest tips and tricks to take your business to the next level. We'll see you Tuesday.
You've created a pretty good training environment up where you're at. You do a lot of coaching. You develop coaches. And that's actually unusual. It's typical to walk into a facility and for instance, we walked into a facility last week where we walk in, we're just like, whoa, the energy is there, it's great. And then there's a lot of times you walk in and just kind of like, oh yeah, there's just people doing shit, like going through the motions. What makes the difference?
I think the coach does. I mean, you kind of have to, set and lead by example in every way possible. I think that, a coach needs to be in there, under the bar with, his athletes, with, clientele, et cetera. So you got to be lifting. And, you also have to, set an example of, how to kind of do things. And, I'm not here trying to tell anyone how to live their life or anything along those lines, but there's so many.
That's what we do on this show.
Exactly. That's why.
Just fucking go for it, man.
In the gym, I don't tell anybody. Here, I'll tell you exactly how to live.
Yeah.
But in the gym, there's so many lessons that I've learned in the gym that have kind of transferred out into the kind of the world. On you get stronger in the gym, and things will start to make a difference. Not only does it happen kind of physically for you, but kind of emotionally, mentally, and that kind of just bleeds out into kind of the rest of the world, because the gym's a really special place, for all of us, really, and for a lot of people listening. It's our salvation, it's our safe place, and it's a place to go to where you can be you can kind of get away from life for a while, kind of reset yourself and kind of move forward. And I think it's really important to kind of set that up, and you have to explain to people and tell them that this is a place where you can just kind of chill, don't worry about all that stuff, and get in here and do your own thing. And I think you have to be an observant coach. So if you see someone walking in, head down, everything, like, hey man, what's going on? You all right? Just having a rough day. It's like, all right, well, you know what? Let's just get moving, and then we'll see what we can get out of you at the end of things. It's not, the goal shouldn't be for me to just, beat the shit out of anyone who comes into the gym, and it's just to get everything that you can get out of that person that day. So that's why, if you're looking at, we can kind of talk all-time maxes to daily maxes.
Yeah,
right?
You're talking about there's variance here. And
There's
a lot of people have,
variance.
Most athletes have unrealistic expectations of themselves because they think that every day they come in that they should be better than they were yesterday.
Correct. And I mean, that's something that I use the term, manage your expectations daily, 10 times daily most likely, and it's just like, hey man, your shoes are tied too tight, your girlfriend broke up with me, with you. That would actually be a good day.
I'm so sad. Console me, please.
Shoes are tied too tight, your girlfriend broke up with you, your dog died. You shouldn't expect much from yourself. Just do what you can, and I mean, that's a win, that's a plus, that's still a step forward for people. So I mean, you not only do you have to kind of create that environment, be able to see what other people are doing, you got to let them know that it's okay to not hit a record when you walk in, as long as you get the work done. That's all that really matters. And just start to be the example that people can follow. Be empathetic to people who kind of walk in, but also not to baby people. I mean, there's going to be people who need kind of the tough love, need to be pushed, and you got to push those people. There's going to be those people that you kind of got to bring along and just drag the carrot in front of them, and eventually they're go ahead and get it. So I think it takes a coach who can coach to people's learning styles, and then also can has the ability to bring people along. And it's just like, look, just step at a time. You're not going to be, you're not going to just walk into the gym and look like this.
Seriously. Seriously. 40 pounds heavier than when I started the show.
Decades of work.
Just sitting around getting stronger.
Whoa.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of work.
Soak it up, Jess. Soak it up.
Every time I see you, I do, Kenny. And I'm all
That's where the majority of the weight is right there.
This is more of a balance thing right now. You're going to fall over. And you just ripped your groin and pants.
Keep going.
I don't know if I can, especially with this kind of sticking out here. Is that your wallet or that apple again? That looks good. Look at that. Get that on camera. That's the whole thing. Oh, man.
It's my apple.
Little Kane Jr.
I don't need any more kids.
But I mean, you kind of even just build off of this. One of the mottos is, lift hard, laugh harder. And I mean, you have to have a sense of humor about things, because life can really fucking suck for people.
Jesse, I think for anybody that's ever come across your path, that's the one thing. And I want to ask you about this specifically. When meeting you and Mark, first of all, both of you, when you walk into a room, are physically imposing, because it's like, oh, good Christ, and then hair. and then it's the numbers when you start to realize what you guys have moved. There's this like massive like energetic shift in places that you walk. So in that environment, do you find two things? your sense of humor was so disarming. You and Mark, to our like nobody expected that,
Right?
Because we didn't know you personally, and then immediately you took the ammo of like these guys are big dumb knuckleheads who know how to lift only,
Right?
And he shifted that altogether. Have you ever found anybody in your environment, Mike's asking about your coaching environment, that doesn't appreciate your sense of humor?
Not to this point. I think, it disarms people sometimes where maybe they don't quite get it.
Right.
And it takes them a while, and then they kind of come back around and they're like, that was pretty funny. I get that. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, cool. I didn't think you really either appreciated it or didn't like it. And there are some people you can only push so far, and then there's people that you can touch on some topics and some on some not on the others, but eventually, again, kind of the atmosphere, it grows.
I usually find whatever makes the person cringe and just
keep
hammer
going.
that.
There you go.
Just fuck them up.
Yeah, but it eventually
just desensitize them to the whole thing, and now they can deal with you.
Yeah, see, we do it a little bit less. That subject still comes up, and they become desensitized to it because they realize because people come into a gym and they have this expectation of whatever it is, and you can't help how they come in and what they're thinking or what they think of you, first impressions or anything. But eventually they're like, okay, this is a safe place. We can kind of joke around and I get it. That's kind of funny. You calling everyone fat, and that's hilarious. And all this other stuff, and it grows on people, and then they start kind of chirping at each other, and then it kind of grows and grows from there. But there are people who will start be very, very quiet, and then it'll grow and grow and grow. But I don't think maybe they just never came back to the gym, so maybe I really didn't notice that they didn't really like it. But the goal, it's hard enough to get people off the fucking couch, right? Then to get them to your door, right? And then they cross into the door, and they you come to your gym or wherever it is, and then it's even that much harder to get them to come back. So to immediate, it's about just everyone's saying hello and hey, how you doing? Everyone's talking. You create an environment of just everyone's friends, everyone's family, and the goal is you can kind of feel that when you come in, and you can kind of see that, and then you can see some people working really hard and getting after things and some intensity. But there has to be all of that to be successful.
That was my next question. Is you as a living example of kind of fucking around for a minute and then going over and picking up a bar that's 900 pounds and then and then to me that's a tremendous example because it reminds people that we have a broad range of capacity and that we're human beings. The thing that you're speaking about just a moment ago, meeting people where they're at on any given day. You as a competitor, were you goofing around and playing just up until the moment of a lift? I haven't seen you compete, so I don't know. I know you as individually, but I don't know you as a competitor.
Yeah. So it's I get the question where some people who are lifting have this sort of intensity about them some of the best people always, you have to go there. There's a place where it's dark and it's fucked up and it's weird, and just it's uncomfortable, and you have to be able to get there to be successful in any sort of sport, one way or the other. It takes some people a lot to get there. Some people it takes a very little to get there. For me, the biggest thing that when I started, I can get there really, really easy. It's turning it back off was a really, really hard thing for me. So, and that's after a fight. Do you ever sleep after a fight?
No.
Right, exactly.
You ever lift? I always stay up late.
He never even noticed until now. He's
exactly, but it's that thing. You can't turn off that adrenaline.
What's funny is you just stumped Doug, and Doug isn't easily stumped.
But it's one of those things where it's so hard for me to kind of turn it off.
Yeah.
So I have to be joking, fucking around, having fun about the whole thing, so I can be intense and then I can come back to it. Being, this is who I am. I'm smiley, I'm happy, I'm trying to have fun, joking around. So when the intensity side comes along, that I think is more disarming than kind of, the joking sense of humor thing for everybody. But whoa. And then it's just oh, you're back to kind of, just like you said. But there is, you have to get there one way or the other. For me, again, it's kind of hard to turn that off. So I mean, I can't be intense all the time because it just exhausts me. I just, I have nothing else to kind of give, so I can kind of just push it away for a second, and it's right there whenever I need it, whenever I want it. I can go ahead and turn it back on, but I have to be able to create enough space for it, because it's not a healthy thing to be in that mindset all the time. You're going to end up killing yourself or killing someone, one way or the other.
Interesting.
Ooh, that was dark.
Well, but you get asked.
Don't know what to say now.
All right.
No, but look,
on the subject of murder.
Listen, as far as like intensity, like I often have difficulty sometimes with our members or coaches who don't understand, like, now's not a good time.
Sure.
So they'll see me lighthearted, and then I'll switch into a moment where I need to take care of myself as a student in a class.
Right.
And they don't get it. They'll be like, hey, and then it's time to like, do you get it? Is there an apple in your pocket? I'm like, there's no apple in my pocket right now.
Not right now.
I need to go. Right.
It'll be there. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be back.
Everything will be fine.
And I mean, that, again, I think that's just leading by example. And, people will figure that out. They'll watch somebody try and do that, and you're like, just hold on a second.
Yeah.
Hold on. And then you go do your thing, and then you come back and I'm like, yeah, check me out. But it's one of those things where, if you come in the gym, we'll be talking, everything along those lines, and I'll see someone's ready to go.
Right.
Get that person ready, whatever they need to kind of get to that lift, and then it's just like, meh, like, so what we were talking about was, and they're just like, oh, okay. Yeah. So, and that's the whole thing. It's like, hey, turn it on when you're over there, when you're at the barbell. When you're not, dude, fucking turn it off. It's okay. You don't have to just walk around. You're going to exhaust yourself. It's just, those people are never successful. And 90% of the time, it's all for show. Banging their head against shit and just like, well, this guy's going to fail his next lift. Like, how do you know? It's like, look, he's expending all of his energy trying to look like he's a tough guy. It's just like, it doesn't fucking matter.
Yeah, over the years, I definitely, I played more chill music in between sets.
Yeah.
Like the heavy metal and going nuts and jumping around. Yeah.
It's, my gym is always
less guar, more Bobby McFerrin.
Yes.
Can you name like 2 Bobby McFerrin songs?
Well, Don't Worry, Be Happy.
Right, of course, that's going to be the one. That's why I asked for 2.
No.
Yeah.
Just don't do country music.
No, I can't.
You can't do country music and lift at the same time. It's impossible.
You're gonna text me
I tried
in 2 days. I thought of another one. You're gonna put your phone away. Put your phone away.
Cheating.
Oh.
He is
So
cheating.
I get it.
So earlier we talked about a couple of old trends, like the trend of assistance work coming into the CrossFit world, and that's pretty mainstream now. We talked about how CrossFit was kind of like the gateway drug especially for ladies to get into strength training, and now a lot of those people have transitioned onto other barbell sports with weightlifting and powerlifting, even strongman, etc. Like, what are some trends that are happening right now that aren't quite so mainstream yet that you see as a positive thing? Like, what's changing in the industry right now that people that aren't deep in the industry might not have seen yet?
I think there's a huge trend and there's a huge push focusing a lot on the recovery side of things. So, diet's always been there. Anyone who's intelligent is, the further you kind of dive into it, the better off you're going to be, the more successful you're going to be in. But there's a huge push for sleep. There's a huge push for, anything.
Kenny's fucking losing it. What's happening, Kenny?
I'm sorry.
Think of another song?
Kenny's going off the deep end.
No. Sorry. It's just really funny.
What? Recovery? Sleep?
No. I just got the giggles.
See, he just
Kenny
figured
ate
out
an edible and it just kicked in.
He just figured out how it's funny.
Is it 420 right now?
No. Sorry. I just completely derailed a very excellent answer, and it was not intentional. I just thought I just wanted to do a tuck between as you were talking and go off camera and kind of give you the full and so I just had
the Buffalo Bill.
The Buffalo Bill.
Puts the lotion in the basket.
So sorry.
It's all right. I think I have that effect on a lot of people, to be honest with you. You're not the first person to tell me that. Because I wanted to tuck their penis between their legs and do a dance for them. Happens all the time.
Puts the lotion on the skin.
Oh my God.
So recovery. There's a big movement to recovery.
Can you ask me that question? Can we start that question?
Let's start over. Start over. Actually, I'm going to just delete the audio we have so far. Start the whole show over.
All right, so recovery is the emerging trend right now.
It's always been there.
Always been there.
Everyone.
Here we go.
Here we go. Wait, can I Instagram this?
Now the neighbors here have been taking pictures.
That's right. We just talked about how this beautiful place you can't do anything. You're gonna come back. It's gonna be a fucking Baskin Robbins. Jesus.
Sorry.
Back to Northern California.
If you're listening on audio only, Kenny was naked off camera.
Yes. He fulfilled his dream of doing that.
Maybe on someone else's camera.
Check that off the list, right? Good for you.
Very impressive, everything I saw.
We all have bucket lists. I
feel much closer to you now.
Kenny was actually
not in the way I want.
half mast.
No. Not in the way I want.
And growing.
When he was at half mast and was able to get it underneath.
That's actually the only way he can get it underneath.
Force it.
It won't reach otherwise.
Force it.
He's been using the silk scarf.
Yes. Oh, man.
Do you know what a blue it is? I'm going to get you one. Google it.
A merkin as well? All right. So go ahead.
Recovery.
I don't know if we can recover from this.
Recovery.
Yeah. So, recovery's always kind of been there, but I think there's so much more technology, whether it's, wearable technology, whether it's an Omega Wave or some sort of heart rate variability measure. People are realizing that, surprise, sleep's important, and being able to track your sleep and, the more you sleep, the better you sleep, the deeper you sleep, the better you're going to kind of perform, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's a big push that way. All the research and everything that is emerging now is all in that realm of things. You have people who are, you have NFL teams who are putting GPS on their athletes, tracking not only how many steps they're taking in any sort of a practice, but their top speed, average speed, everything along these lines. I mean, the amount of data that's coming out is it's ridiculous. So, and they're not necessarily coming up with anything mind-blowing. They're kind of coming back to the idea of like, hey, we probably shouldn't overwork these people a lot during practice so they'll, perform better for the games. But now they actually have this, huge amount of data and these data points that they can show to some old school coach or, a general manager and say, no, seriously, we shouldn't overwork these guys. Look at what happens when we do. Yeah. And then they go, oh,
this is going to be probably most amazing for MMA.
That's coming as well. That's you'd be surprised at how touchy of a thing it is, because people are like, here, we want to put this watch on you and we're going to do all this stuff and we're just going to read everything. They're like, you're like listening to my phone
I'm just going to track all your biometrics and where you go at night. And there's a camera in your bedroom. Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah. People get freaked out about it. People have opted out on a professional level. These are professional, NFL athletes saying, I don't want you knowing all this stuff about me. They're like, well, bitch, we fucking own you. We pay you $9 million for going around with a fucking ball. You wear this fucking watch so we can tell what's going on. But there's people who will pay money back to not wear this stuff. That's how kind of freaked out and weird that they end up getting. But it is going to be one of those things where, I'm sure you could look back at your MMA career and be like, wow, if I didn't train for 7 hours a day, I probably would have been a better fighter running into that last fight or whatever it ends up being.
Totally. I was a fucking mess half the time.
Right, exactly.
Most of the time.
And then you're not the you're not the exception. I would say 90% of the people out there are doing that.
Well, I actually watching, as an example, I was watching The Ultimate Fighter years and years and years ago when Josh Koscheck was on there. And I remember one of the strength coaches on the show, and this is probably good TV as opposed to necessarily the reality of it, but on the show the guy was like, hey, more isn't necessarily better. And Josh Koscheck looks at him and goes, hey, I've been doing this a long time. More is better.
Right.
And that's not the only example out there, but like that guy is super famous and he's very successful and maybe more is better for him. I'm not saying he's wrong necessarily, but people hear that and they go, oh, okay, well, if that elite guy says more is better, maybe there's something to it. Maybe I should do more too.
And I think as kind of, the reality TV show and all the social media and everything has kind of come about, so we feel like these athletes are closer to us, like we actually know them, or somehow we are closer in proximity as far as like physical capabilities, they're like, oh, he does it, I can do it too. People don't understand, these are the 99th percentile of the 99th percentile who we're dealing with. These are people who are going to be physically successful in no matter what they do.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So they could be an MMA fighter, they could be a basketball player. They just decided to start punching people opposed to throw a ball and through a hoop. It's, you know, these people are really just special people. So the more is better. We're actually finding out that more just ends up being more for most people. And I mean, in Josh's case, you know, if we really kind of track his career, he was able to sustain that for a while till he was about like 28 or so, right? And he's been wrestling, doing this at a high level for probably 18 years at that point. You only have your window is only so big, and it's going to be bigger for the special people who are more physically gifted. But you know, everyone has a certain amount of time, and we're finding out that the better we take care of ourselves, the longer we can kind of sustain that, right? I won't say a name, but the guy that we were just talking about, an intern of mine, got to train one of the most successful quarterbacks of all time. Yeah. It's like, hey man, what do you do with this person? It's like, I bring him his coffee. I was like, you're a strength coach and you brought him his coffee. He was like, yeah. He goes, he just told me straight out. He was like, I can't afford to go ahead and do all this stuff. He goes like, I got 9 hours of tape to watch. Yeah. I'm like, oh, I get it. Okay, so more is more. You know what I mean? More is better watching, you know, film and figuring out these defenses and knowing where the holes are so you can go ahead and throw these passes to people and, you know, make $1 million. Right. So it's, you know, it's going to be one of those things where hopefully, and more people are figuring it out, like, pay a little bit more attention to, you know, something that we say is, you know, you gotta work out twice as hard outside of the gym than you do inside of the gym. And if you're gonna ever really decide that you want to make something out of yourself in any sort of capacity. So there are more people figuring this out, whether it's too late or right on time for them, or in how much they actually understand. We're gonna end up finding out. But I mean, it's one of those things where people are starting to see this. You're going to see a lot of, what's that watch? Whoop. There's, you know, the Omega Wave. There's, you know, HRV, and people are starting to track this stuff. I think it's starting to become a trend where people are just wearing a bunch of shit just because it's popular and it's cool. But there are people who are actually starting to understand what that means and how to base their training off of it. So, but you're facing a lot of stuff. You have to know what the data points are, understand them, and know how to base things off of that. And you also have to start to kind of convince some of these old school guys like a Koscheck or a NFL football coach who's been doing, look son, I've been doing this for 40 fucking years and you know, more is better. Like, we're putting on pads and we're going to just go full all out all the time. We're like, you can't do that. Like, I got 7 fucking rings that say I can. Like, okie dokie. Yeah. All right. Like, there's no convincing you, but we are building, you know, data sets and data points that hopefully there is going to be a trend towards having healthier, safer athletes around for a longer period of time. Because I know growing up for me, I remember people with careers of 15, 20 years, and now the average NFL career is 4 years, right? You know, the average, you know, I think the average basketball is 7.
Well, you gotta keep in mind, a team and a coach can cycle through players. I mean, for every player that goes, you can just bring another one in. So the success of the coach isn't necessarily the longevity of the athlete.
Exactly. And again, I won't be able to say names here, but there's a coach who, an NFL coach, who they cut down their roster, right? So they start with, I think, 96 or so, right, through training camp and everything, and then they cut it in half. So a strength and conditioning coach friend of mine was just like, okay, so we're doing all this work and everything, all that, just cycling through everything so fast. And then they cut half the people because they have to. And they're doing the same amount of work. And he's like, coach, you can't do this. You've already doubled their work before when you had double the people. So now you're adding this much on. And he's just like, this is how I do it. Like, you're not going to be around you nor any of these guys. Right. Guess what happened? Everybody got injured. They had a horrible season. He ends up getting fired. You know, this shouldn't be a surprise, but he's been doing it for 30 years. And son, I know more is better. So we're getting a trend where there's a lot of people behind the scenes going, that's not going to work. And more and more people are listening to that guy now. So I think that's cool, but it's also one of those things where, for me, I see a tendency for some people to use that as an excuse as well. Like, well, my biometrics say that I can't
right.
do this.
It's red.
I don't fucking
It's
care.
red.
It's
Can't
like
do it.
You have to try.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can't blame it on like, no, my heart rate's
Yeah.
a little too high. Like, dude, just you gotta, you know what? I mean, there are gonna be days where you have to do something and you may not be ready, but that's when it's when you're mentally gonna get stronger and you're gonna, physically be better for it.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's time when you step in the ring, like, that guy looks really fucking big. Like, I don't want to get punched in the face by that guy. But you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and do it, and you're better for it. Probably. You may not remember, a couple years, but I mean.
Well, I mean, I think it's good, especially you may not want to spend that time near competition, but really far out, let's spend some time in the red.
Yes.
You're not supposed to be. I think we talked about this with Andy and BMAC.
Yeah.
We're talking about it's not good to be optimal all day, every day.
Sure.
It's like you need to spend some time in some discomfort, and that might mean a couple weeks in the red, and then take a week where you dial it back. But you're supposed to push into that area. Again, not the week of competition,
right?
But and that's where those biometrics can come in handy. It's like, you just now got in the red,
right?
And someone else has already been there for a week. You can keep pushing a little bit further.
And I think that's also. I mean, I think that's really important for people to kind of realize. They have to, where you're going to go red, you're going to go red. It's going to be vastly different, but that should start to influence how we train, right? Yeah. So you have to break it in order to know how to kind of fix it and put it back together. And I'm not going to tell people, go out there, get hurt, but you're going to have to figure out where your limit is, where your line is, and then just get close to that. You don't have to step over it often, if ever, but if you're never pushed to that point, you're never going to know where
you just got to step over it at least twice.
I would agree. I mean, I really do think so, and especially if it's in the off season, if it's far away. And when you do step over the red and into the red, and you either overtrain or you get a little banged up, you find out what works for you recovery-wise. Yeah. Like, what really works for me is this. Like, how do you know that? Because I fucked myself up and I fixed myself, and now I'm better for it. Yeah. Like, all right, well, then, you got it. You figured it out. I don't need to help you, tell you what you need to do. Whatever you figured it out, it works. At least for this point in time.
Right.
I think that's really difficult to coach because I feel like as more information gets out and the hybridization of fitness continues to accelerate, so people are borrowing cross streams.
Hybridization.
Well, there is, though. I mean, you've got
domains.
Hybridization sensation.
Andy and I recently did a lot of work on understanding the roots of the fitness industry, and it boiled down to three basic components. And they're as the market worked. There was one that was basically derived from the aesthetic fitness community that was descendants of Bob Hoffman and Joe Weider. Sure. So you got your bodybuilding, and then those environments look like what are classified by our communities as Globo gyms, right? So you got cardio separating from the weights physically, metaphorically, and that was influenced by the creation of GIH in Sweden and the first cardio labs, basically, and the development of cardiorespiratory understanding. And so that ushered in science that understood physiology only from the metrics of what was happening from the cardiorespiratory perspective. So then
you're doing good.
I'm gonna stay with it. I'm gonna stay with it.
Words, man.
Pomander is gonna stay with it.
Modal domains.
So broad modal domains. 10 general skills. Constantly varied. The next one was strength and conditioning. So it was periodization. We're gonna stimulate you. We know generally what's gonna happen when we stimulate these percentages, these volumes. Science coming in to corroborate all those kind of stimulus. Problem is, in those environments, that would take either a really good coach or 2.5 hours to train. Right. Then a functional fitness model comes that combines a lot of this stuff. Right. So now these three giant bubbles are starting to kind of merge with each other, and all of them have an array of information so as coaches, one of the things that I find challenging is that people are getting a lot of different content thrown at them. And so they're saying to the coach, yeah, but I've got these X, Y, and Z ideas.
Right.
And you're going, well, okay, let's look at some data points. And then they've got 9 things and 9 different sort of perspectives coming from these 3 general bubbles.
Yeah. And they're following 900 other people who are, seen as expert in all those things. I see it, as coaches, I'm sure you guys see it all the time too. You see someone come in, I see there's a guy who, oh, okay.
Oh, I'm with you. More's coming out.
Who I follow a couple coaches online as well, the Instagram and everything, and I can literally tell you, like, I can spin through some stuff and I can see somebody doing a movement and I'm like, I know who's going to be doing this later on today because I saw it, and whether it's a face pull using the reverse hyper or something just weird. I just kind of,
dude, we should banded face pull on the reverse hyper.
It's actually really good. Give it a try.
Yeah.
It's been done, but you can say you're the
no
first
way it can
one.
hurt
it's all
you.
Good.
Yeah.
And you see people doing this stuff, and I see people doing this stuff, and I'm just like, I guess it doesn't necessarily really matter what you did. I said do some like upper back stuff. It's like, but you don't have to, like, just people are just reaching and following the first thing, and whether it's the social media, whether our attention spans are so small, whatever it ends up being, it's just like, oh, that's it, that's the answer. It's like, no, that guy is telling you to do this. That variation worked for him.
Read the caption.
Because exactly. He's he's been doing it for 15 years and it really worked for him. He's never had a shoulder injury. You doing it this one time, for 1 week, isn't necessarily going to add up to kind of the same thing, but it is important that people end up being able to try this stuff and have the freedom to do so. Again, we're kind of talking about creating an environment. It's okay. I don't care what you do. Just do some upper back. Your upper back sucks. Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, right.
But eventually, you're going to have to, guess what? You're going to probably come back and do some rows and like some shrugs and some like rear delt raises because you're just like, I don't think that really worked. It's like, it's because that guy did rows and, rear delt stuff for 15 years and he got so goddamn bored with it that he put a band on the reverse hyper and started doing this stuff. And they're like,
right.
Oh, so you got to let them go ahead and do this stuff and figure it out. And as a coach, there's so many people like, no, it's my way or nothing. I'm like, you got to be able to bend a little bit. If you give me, the first 2 movements of what I put on the board, what I gave to you, I'll just give you body parts. Just go make that feel good. Go do some rows, some lats. I don't care. Do whatever you want. Do some hamstrings. Do some abs. Get out of here. What do you want me to do? I don't care. Do whatever it is that you want. It's like, see everybody else doing some stuff? There's 3 examples. Go follow that. Go open up your phone. You get 16 things. You'll find out what works for you. If it doesn't work for you, throw it away. Don't keep hoping that it's eventually going to go ahead and work for you. So I think that's kind of as a coach and as an athlete and someone who's kind of getting into things, you have to be able to use something, know if it works or not, know how long it works for not, and then eventually kind of stack them on top of each other.
So you allow a little bit of a leash, a little bit of space.
I allow for a lot of space.
Yeah.
Like,
were you always like that? Or is this something that's changed over time? Were you one of those coaches like, it has to be my way, and then over time you're like, it doesn't really matter that much?
I think going into things, I knew instinctively that it really didn't necessarily matter. Because everyone wants, we got to train the this right here. It's like, well, you don't necessarily have to just keep squatting to get better at squatting. I bet you if you build up your hamstrings and your glutes in whatever way that you want to, your squat will kind of get better. But to start, I was just like, no, we're all just going to do this because I want to see what fucking works and what doesn't. That was, very early on, just experimenting and seeing what did work for a larger group of people. And then you kind of see these individual variations. So it's definitely a learned thing over a longer period of time. There's always going to be people, and again, it's just like, that front squats with the kettlebell work really well for you. Where they hurt your knee, I don't fucking care. Just build up your legs. It doesn't matter to me. So I give a lot of leash to people. It's just like, go ahead and do whatever you end up wanting to do. Just make this feel good, make it get a pump, kind of look good, feel good, and then go ahead and get out of here. And I think that's what people got to end up understanding, that there's so many different ways. A guy named Buddy Morris, Coach X, who's been an NFL strength and conditioning coach for a long, long time. I personally think he said it best. He's like, the best thing about this industry is that everything works. So the worst thing about this industry is that everything works. So a true coach is going to be able to understand and take what works and just be able to just put it all together.
Right.
Over a workout, over a week, over a month, over a year, over years. And they're going to be able to really get you from here to your goal and draw you a straight line through it. But you get so many people so tripped up, and so many new people, like we were talking about, jumping online and becoming the next greatest coach because, I had him do this and it worked. Like, of course it fucking worked.
Right.
But it's only going to work for 4 weeks, and then you got to change it to something else. Do you know what happens there? Do you know what happens 12 weeks down the line when now you're dealing with some sort of an injury or anything along those lines? But like, yeah, but did you see that fucking move that I put on Instagram? Like, I saw that. Thanks for fucking up my guy. This is great. I can't wait to undo what you just did. Congratulations.
Do you follow me on Instagram?
I do.
You match my moves? You go in the gym
all the time,
afterwards?
1 for 1.
Dope. This explains a lot about your physique right now.
It does. Yeah. But I try and people are like, hey, who should I read? Who should I follow? I think you should follow everybody. I like to see what people are doing, whether it's good or bad. And I'm not necessarily always the person to make that judgment, but I want to see what other people are doing. I like people when people are creative, because eventually, like you said, there's only so many different things that we can go ahead and do. And you're like, oh, maybe the bandy thing off of this, that feels really good for people. I'm like, oh, okay, let's just write that in. It doesn't matter.
Sometimes the line between good and bad is very fine.
Yes.
Like we interviewed David Weck, the inventor of the Bosu ball, recently, and that was like, for all of us, for very different reasons, very fascinating, to say the least. But the one thing...
Did he intend it for people to do barbell squats and standing on them?
No.
Come on, really?
Yeah.
You're kidding me.
So we did...
We should have covered that, yeah.
We kind of did.
I ended up doing kettlebell swings on it, though. So,
yeah?
But,
there you go.
He had some very unique things to say.
Super unique things to say. At one point, Doug bitch slapped him 4 times. Because he invented a way to protect a skull underneath taking blows, which seemed to work because Doug was kind of unleashing by the 3rd and 4th hit. But one of the things that was really compelling, Mike was just sort of like, yeah, this is like one of my dreams. And Doug and I are like, hold on, dude, like, you got to slow down, because he was coming so fast with so much information. So he had us get on a Bosu ball and basically externally rotate and get on the 4th metatarsal and squeeze in. And I'll be damned, man, I felt glutes, adductors, all these muscles that, like, I feel like I cue pretty damn well when I'm teaching somebody how to squat. Mm-hmm. The next week, I went in and immediately just started. We have a Bosu ball floating around the gym. I pulled it out and just started putting people on it and started doing what he had us do. And I was like, fuck, the progression is so much faster than the big tool set that I have to teach somebody to squat. And I was like, okay. And then same thing, he had us deadlift in a similar position on our toes, feeling the same muscles. And I'm like, okay, I kind of get it, but then just the sheer creativity and this, like, an apparent lunacy, like, was actually effective. Like, I took back to the gym, and people who had kinetic dysfunction and really poor motor patterning were suddenly like, oh, I get it.
Right.
Like, you've been telling me that for 3 years. I'm like,
yeah.
Fuck.
I mean,
fucking Bosu ball.
On a Bosu ball. Like, we're back around to a goddamn Bosu ball.
That's coaching and parenting, though. You're gonna have to say the same thing over and over and over again. But you have to say it so many different ways until someone understands it and someone gets it. Mm-hmm. I have a guy named Jeremy Avila who, deadlifted 737 when he came to me. He ended up pulling 837 within about 6 months. Okay, and there was a point in time when he went from 780, I think, to about 80 or 820 or so. When he deadlifts sumo, and he just yanks the bar off the ground, like the most violent thing you have ever seen in the world, and you're just like, whoa, oh my god!
It was both his biceps.
I was like, hey, I just need you to stand up a little bit taller, to just don't yank on the bar. And I've been telling them this for 4 or 5 months, right? Comes in one day and has just like a 50-pound PR all out of nowhere. I'm just like, you're standing up straighter, you're not yanking on the bar as much, you're really just being tall as you kind of go through your movement. It's like, what'd you do? It's like, well, I was watching, I don't even remember what it was. And they told me that I shouldn't yank on the bar and I should stay taller. And I was just like, what? You motherfucker. I was just like, that was mine. I said that months ago. It was like, but it's one of those things where you just got to be like, cool, good for you. Like, why are you bleeding out of your mouth, Jesse? Like, don't worry about it, man. It's not me chewing on my tongue because I've been telling you this shit for months. But he just needed someone else to tell it to him in a different way, and it kind of clicked. And I mean, I think for you, that shows, and I hate to say this, but just how high level of a coach you are, and how you can actually understand.
He hates to say it.
I know, I'm gonna hate to say it, but
He's at it.
Like, if there's some sort of kinesthetic awareness that you can teach to people, I think that's amazing. I used to call it, kind of learning through violence. And you just have, I remember I would just hit you as you're going squatting. You're just like, stop it. Like, no, tighter here. And you're like, there, tight. Right. Like, okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it's one of those things, if you can get someone to feel it and understand it in a different way, I'm all for anything. But now the whole thing is like, all right, cool. Now everyone's squatting and deadlifting on their toes or something. Yeah. Where do you go from there?
Right.
Is that just a teaching point?
Right.
That's great. Maybe that's a starting point.
Right.
Now do you introduce a barbell on top of this? Right. No, probably not.
Toes.
Probably not.
Tippy toe.
Tippy toes.
Sure.
So I mean,
it's next level shit.
It is.
You get on your tippy toes and you yank the bar violently.
As hard as you can. Absolutely.
The balls of your feet off the ground. Right. Toes only.
Got it. Toes and heels.
Round your back.
Toes and heels.
No
God. Ball of your foot.
Yep. Ooh. Handstand deadlifts.
All right. I think we've gotten to that point.
Learning through violence.
Where can
it works, man. It works.
Where can people find more about you?
Tuckbetweens.com, right?
It's hairstylebyjesse.com.org, powerwad.com, Jesse Burdick on all social medias.